Alright, so you picked yourself up some dragon dice and you want to play with these perilous polyhedrals, but you don't know where to start. Well, fortunately, thanks to the brand new 4.0 rules that just released, there's never been a better time to dive into or pick back up dragon dice. So thanks to the fine folks at SFR, in today's video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know in order to start playing. In Dragon Dice, players control armies of fantasy races fighting for control of the land. Each unit is represented by individual dice, which will do battle at 3 different locations called terrains. If players ever control 2 terrains at once, which is captured by maneuvering a terrain to its 8th face on their turn, or completely destroy all enemy units, then they win the game. While there are many different tournament formats with different player counts and army sizes, a standard game of Dragon Dice consists of 2 players duking it out head-to-head with armies that are of equal value. And the value of your army is equal to the health of your units. And units, just like t-shirt sizes, come in small, medium, large, and monster, corresponding to 1, 2, 3, and 4 health each. I recommend starting with 30-point armies as a good, healthy total, which also just happens to be the size of the Tree Folk and Firewalker armies in the 2-player starter set. Convenient, huh? So let's talk about these dice really quick. As you see, the units themselves are made up of colors that denote what race that they belong to, and in this game you can combine races. You can have armies where dwarves and elves are hanging out with feral and frostwings, but for the most part in basic games you're just going to have an army comprised of one single race. And you'll also notice that these colors correspond to the colors that can be found in the different terrains in the game. And that's because if you share one of the colors on your dice with one of the colors on the terrain, you can activate your racial abilities. Seeming as how racial abilities aren't actually part of the starter rules, we don't need to worry about them here. We will, however, cover them as well as their relationship to the colorful properties on terrain dice in a future video. Every race has many different units available to them, each of which have their own unique combination of icons, though each unit can be identified by its face. Face icons are cool for a number of reasons. First off, they count as successes equal to the dice's health in pretty much any sort of roll that you're making. Second, they have rad line work that gives the game a huge amount of personality. But third, it's what denotes what die it is. Is this a heavy melee unit or a medium cavalry? Or maybe it's a monster like a phoenix or fire shadow. While the names and categories don't offer any restrictions in building your armies, they are helpful identifiers when putting your force together for the table. Struggling with maneuvers? Add some cavalry units to your army. Struggling with getting bashed in the head a bunch? Add some light and heavy smashy boys. I mean, melee. Aside from their face, sides of units consist of the standard symbols which count as successes during certain rolls: magic, missile, melee, saves, and maneuver. But large and monster units may have special action icons that trigger when they show up in a type of roll. For instance, trample here counts as successes during both maneuver and melee attack rolls, or a unit that rolls a bullseye during a missile roll gets to immediately inflict damage on units in the defending army, then rolls again. Considering how you want to focus your army and what special action icons are on your dice is a huge part of the fun in the game. Okay, so you got your army, you know your dice, and you're ready to face off. But there are 2 more things that every player needs to bring to the table. First off, each army has to bring 2 terrains. And then, this is Dragon Dice, so of course, you're going to have to bring some dragons to the table. These can be summoned using magic in the game. They come in a variety of colors, but the important thing that you need to know is that you are going to bring 1 dragon for every 24 points of health in your army or part thereof. So in the case of the 30-point Firewalker versus Tree Folk armies in the Learn to Play set, each army will bring 2 dragons. To set up, first players are going to take the dragons that they brought and put them into their respective summoning pools. Then they take the terrains that they brought and decide which of them is going to be their home base and which of them they're going to put as the proposed middle terrain. Next, players are going to take their armies and secretly divide them into 3 groups to start at the different terrains. The restrictions for starting position are that each terrain must have at least 1 of your units, and no terrain may have more than half of your total army size. Then, once the game starts, these restrictions no longer apply. To finish out setup, each player rolls the army that they have present at their opponent's home base. The player with the most successes gets to decide who goes first. And that may seem like an easy decision, but the player who goes second gets to keep their proposed terrain in the center, while the player who goes first has to say bye-bye to theirs. Finally, to finish setup, every terrain in play is rolled by its respective owners, with 8s being re-rolled and 7s being pushed down to 6s. Now you can start the game. There are many steps to a turn in Dragon Dice, but all of them really boil down to 3 different types. There is first beginning of turn stuff. This starts with the expiration of effects. In other words, any effects that say that they last until the beginning of your next turn, well, they expire now at the beginning of your turn. Then second, the 8th phase bonus. If you have captured any terrain, in other words, you have maneuvered it to its 8th phase on your turn, which means you now own that terrain, then you get the bonus of whatever is depicted on its 8th phase. That now resolves. Then there is a dragon attack. No matter who summoned a dragon using their magic, if there is a dragon at your terrain, then it will attack your army and you'll have to deal with that. More on that later. Then there are the marches. Your first and second march. Both are optional. Each march first starts with maneuvers, then moves on to performing the action that is depicted on the terrain dice: magic, missile, or melee. If you control the 8th phase, then you get your choice of magic, missile, or melee. Both maneuver and action are optional, but they must be performed in that order. Once you finish your first march, you can perform a second march with units at a different location. You can perform a march with your units in the reserve. That's the only place you can activate units outside of the terrains, but there is no maneuver. They can only perform magic, and the only spells that they can cast are ones that specifically say they can be cast from the reserve. So it's pretty limited. Once you're all done with your marching, then you get your reserve step. This consists of first, you taking your units in the reserve and choosing if you want to reinforce, put them out into the different terrains. Then you can retreat, where you take units from the terrains and put them back into your reserves. Now you have finished your first turn of Dragon Dice. It is now your opponent's turn. So let's talk about terrain dice and maneuvering. There are 4 basic terrains in the game. There's mountains, flatlands, coastlands, and it's in here somewhere. Swamplands. And while all 4 of them have the 3 M's on sides 1 through 7, that being magic, missile, and melee, the exact distribution of them all depends on what's on the 8th phase. Maneuvering is an action which, if successful, will increase or decrease the value on a terrain die by 1, which is super helpful because you can only perform the action of what's shown on the current face of the terrain die. And that can come into play in a lot of ways, because your army may be strong at certain actions, the defending army may be weak against certain actions, and if you manage to move a terrain up to its 8th face, then you capture the terrain, which, remember, if you capture 2 terrains, then you immediately win. Nifty, huh? Just make sure to maintain control. Captured terrains can still be maneuvered down to a 7 by opponents, releasing it from your control. Similarly, if you ever have no units left out of terrain you've captured, either because you got slaughtered or abandoned ship like a leaderless kobold, the terrain is released from your control and moves back down to a 7. Okay, so back to the game. When resolving a march at a terrain, you can optionally declare that you're going to attempt to maneuver the die, not whether you're going to move it up or down, just that you're going to attempt to maneuver it. If your opponent has any units there, they can declare that they are going to counter maneuver it. If they don't have any, or they choose not to counter maneuver it, you simply just move the die up or down 1 step. But if they say that they're going to counter maneuver, then you must first roll your dice for maneuvers, counting all maneuver successes and remembering that face icons count as successes in any rolls, and resolving any maneuver related SAIs. Then your opponent does the same. Now, if at this point you have more maneuver successes than your opponent, or are tied, great! You won the maneuver roll, and you can proceed with increasing or decreasing the value on the terrain die. But if you have less than, then you do not win the maneuver roll and just nothing happens. Either way, you can proceed with the rest of the march by performing the action printed on the terrain die now, or your choice of magic, missile, or melee if now you control the 8th phase, and this is where the heart of Dragon Dice truly lies. During melee, as with any sort of action, you take your entire army there, you roll it, and count up the successes related to that action. First, you look at all of your special action icons that you rolled that apply during this type of roll, in this case melee. I haven't rolled any, but had I rolled a smite, then I would immediately inflict 4 damage upon the opposing army with no saves possible. But in this case, I haven't rolled any melee symbols, but I have rolled the face icon of a monster, which has 4 health, so that counts as 4 successes. If I rolled any successes during a melee attack, then the defender gets to roll to see how many saves they get, reducing my successes. In this case, we then look at special action icons that would apply. Trample does not count during saves. Then I have 3 saves here. So now we have 4 successes, 3 saves, meaning that 1 damage is dealt to the defending army. When damage is dealt in Dragon Dice, the owner of the army receiving the damage gets to decide how they want to distribute it, but they must kill as many units as possible in order to cover all remaining damage. In other words, a 4 health monster can't absorb the 1 damage. You must kill one of your 1 health units there if possible. You choose which unit dies, and then all remaining damage, if there was any left over that wasn't enough to kill any units at the defending army, would just be considered to be absorbed and go away. The unique thing about melee is once the attacker rolls their attack and the defender does their saves, if the defender wants to, and still has units there, then they can roll a counterattack. Just like a melee attack, you check to see if there's any special action icons that resolved and then count up successes. Face icon plus 1 hit means 5 successes here. Then the original attacking army gets to roll a defense and resolve any special action icons. Illusion as a special action icon doesn't count towards saves. And then we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, including a 1 health unit's face icon saves. So 5 successes minus 4 saves means the Firewalkers have to take 1 damage and lose a little dude. Now the melee action is done. And then there is the missile action, which is just like a melee attack, except the defending army doesn't get to make a counterattack, and your dudes and dudettes can attack either the army opposing them or at a neighboring terrain. In other words, your dudes here can fire upon these dudes over here. So we're going to roll, count up successes, and resolve any special action icons. In this case, we have 3, 4, 5, and no applicable special action icons. And then defending army rolls, resolve any special action icons like fly here, which either generates maneuvers or saves, your choice. So in this case, 4 saves plus 3 saves from the face icon, and then 1 shield means that we have 8 over here versus 3, 4, 5 successes. Firewalkers take no damage, and the ranged attack is done. And now finally we get to magic, where things get a little bit higgledy-piggledy. First off, you can perform magic as normal at a terrain with the matching symbol for magic, but it is the only type of action that can be performed by your reserve army as the marching army. But that said, some spells specifically state that they cannot be cast from the reserve, so know what you're getting into. When you roll magic, each unit produces points equal to their successes that can be spent on spells corresponding to that unit's color. This is good and all when you have all the dice of the same type, but if your army consists of coral elves and lava elves, you might not be able to roll enough to cast higher level spells in any one color. Once you determine how many magic points you have, you can cast as many general spells as you want, and each faction has access to 2 spells that only they can cast. And what sorts of devilry can you get up to using magic? Well, all kinds of stuff. How about summoning lightning bolts from the sky affecting specific units and enemy armies, or teleporting units from one army to another, or resurrecting units from the dead, buffing your army so they have extra attack or defense for a turn, or, I don't know, how about summoning dragons?
This game is named Dragon Dice, so we gotta talk about dragons. Remember how earlier we mentioned beginning of turn effects? Yeah, dragons are neutral units that hang out at the terrain that they were summoned to, attacking each player's army there at the beginning of their turn.
Unless there are two or more dragons at the same location, in which case they fight each other. But we're only covering the basic rules here, and that's an advanced rule, so we'll save that for another video down the line.
First roll to see what their effects will be, then you roll your units to see how you respond. Now the dragon's roll can range from vicious claws to fearsome tail whips that allow them to reroll, to horrifying elemental dragon breath, unique to each color. On the other hand, they can also roll bellies, making them easier to kill, wings that cause them to fly away, and treasure chests granting a free promotion to the defending player. More on promotions in a bit. Assuming you didn't get so lucky as to roll a treasure chest or wing, you roll your army and respond with both saves and attacks at the same time. Saves work as normal, face icons can be contributed to saves, melee, or missile. Then, if you manage to scrape together either 10 melee or 10 missile hits, you slay the dragon. Congrats, you get to promote your army. If you didn't kill it, well, that sucks. It'll stick around to haunt each player at this terrain until it goes away.
Promotion happens for a variety of reasons in Dragon Dice, but when you get to promote an army at a specific area, you get to swap out units for units of one greater size from your dead unit area, meaning that your smalls become mediums, your mediums become larges, your larges become monsters. Being able to promote your most valuable units back to life can be a huge game changer in Dragon Dice. Okay, so you've finished your marching for the turn, and now you're going to wrap up by handling your reserves. First, you're going to reinforce, and then you're going to retreat. To reinforce, you take any units from your reserve, and you can choose to put them into any of the terrains that are in play. Then, you can take any of the units from the terrains in play and put them back into your reserve. Because reinforce happens before retreat, you have to be really selective about what units you want to draw back into your reserves, because they won't be able to join back into the fight until the end of your next turn. Once you're done with all of your reserves, then your turn is over. You've just completed a turn in Dragon Dice. Alright, so now you finish your turn, your opponent gets to take theirs. And as a brief recap of a turn in Dragon Dice, first, the expiration of effects. Then second, there's going to be the 8th phase bonuses. Finally, the dragons that are at a location that you are present at are going to attack your units there. And then you get to take up to 2 marches where you select a group of units at a location, then you can maneuver, and then you can do the action printed on a die. Finally, there's a reserve step where you get to deploy units from the reserve out into your armies, and then take units from your armies and put them into the reserves. The game ends whenever anyone has 2 captured terrains under their control, or you've finally eliminated all units from your opposing army. If you've managed to do either of those things, you've just won a game of Dragon Dice.
That said, there's a ton of strategy and advanced rules to explore with all kinds of dice available through various means. I hope to cover more of that in this channel, and I will definitely have an advanced rules video covering topics like minor terrain, items, dragonkin, and dragon fighting. But with everything we've covered, you have plenty enough to get playing some basic games. As you become more familiar with your dice and you have strategy or rules questions, I recommend checking out the page and forums at sfr-inc.com, where there are tons of resources, deliberation, and discussion.
Alright everyone, I think that's going to do it for today's Dicey Deliberation. So if you enjoyed this video, you found it helpful, and you want to see more, keep on coming, or you have any questions about anything that we covered in this video today, then please start a discussion in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer any questions. Also, I plan on making more Dragon Dice videos, so if you have specific ideas for topics, either advanced rules, racial profiles, or whatever else, then definitely let me know. Lastly, thank you so much to SFR for sponsoring this video and allowing me to present the awesome 4.0 rules to the world. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald, and you get playing some Dragon Dice.